Okay, the title of the talk is all about the concept of metabolic inflexibility and what are the causes and consequences. This was delivered at the 32nd Diabetes Philippines Annual Convention, November 13, 2015. Here's my outline. First, I'm going to discuss the hormone fuel interrelationship on how a normal individual utilizes a specific substrate during the cycle of fed and fasting state. Then discuss the difference between metabolic flexible versus metabolic inflexible individual. Then what are the potential mechanisms that may contribute to metabolic inflexibility? And then we go to the role of metabolic inflexibility in the advancement of metabolic disorder, namely insulin-resistant state, obesity, type 2 DM, and even advancement of cardiovascular disease. And finally, discuss prevention and intervention. Okay, let us explore the hormone fuel interrelationship during the cycle of fed and fasting state. Humans have a constant requirement for energy but eat only intermittently. Now, to cope up with the intermittent supply of energy, humans have the way to solve this problem because our normal physiologic organs respond to blood nutrients through a series of well-controlled mechanisms, such that energy is stored at times of surplus during a fed state. Hepatic and muscle are stored as glycogen, adipose tissue stored as triglycerides, and to a certain extent as muscle protein. And this is released at times of requirement during fasting state, where those stored nutrients are mobilized from glycogen to glucose and triglycerides to fatty acid. It is really amazing to know on how the human body know when to use and store fuel in times of abundance and release this fuel storage in times of shortage. This is because the organs are metabolically flexible, meaning flexible in a sense that it preferentially oxidizes fat in times of shortage, that is in fasting state, and preferentially oxidize carbohydrates in times of plenty, following or after a meal. So the basic principle is that fasting, fat oxidation, fed state is glucose oxidation. Please remember this because this will serve as the fundamental of our discussion. Please keep this in mind as we continue with the presentation. Okay, the following slides are animated cartoons showing on how metabolic flexibility works intracellularly. So following a meal where glucose coming from the gut stimulate insulin secretion, glucose now undergo the pathway of glycolysis. The end product in the cytoplasm is pyruvate, and then pyruvate enters the mitochondria and converted into acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA then combined with oxaloacetate to form citrate, thus enter the Krebs cycle, which generate a lot of ATPs. But when ATPs is adequate, this process has to slow down. This leads to elevation of citrate levels in the mitochondria, and then citrate diffuse out of the mitochondria to cytoplasm, where it starts its de novo synthesis of fatty acid. The fatty acid is then assembled as triglycerides. The triglycerides is transported via the circulation by lipoprotein called VLDL. In the vicinity of adipose tissue, there is the enzymes called lipoprotein lipase that split triglycerides to fatty acid and glycerol before it enters and repackaged to triglyceride and stored in the adipose tissue, or saved for the rainy days. Lipoprotein lipase is activated by the presence of insulin, and some of the triglycerides is used um, by other tissues including muscle cells, but glucose is mainly oxidized in the skeletal muscles during the fed state. So during fed state, it is preferential carbohydrate oxidation over fat oxidation because this is modulated by hormone insulin. Now, during fasting state, wherein no exogenous glucose are being ingested by mouth, insulin release is inhibited and glucagon level increases. In the liver, this leads to breakdown of glycogen from the process of glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. Other counter-regulatory hormones such as epinephrine and cortisol with a low level of insulin levels activates the hormone-sensitive lipase presence in the adipose tissue. This results to breakdown of triglycerides, leading to a release of free fatty acid into the circulation, where peripheral tissues such as skeletal muscles enhance their uptake and fat oxidation. Glucose release from the liver helps maintain blood glucose levels for essential organs such as the brain, central nervous system, and the RBC. So during fasting, preferential fat oxidation over over carbohydrate oxidation, and this is spearheaded by the hormone glucagon. So let's get into the definition of metabolic flexibility and inflexibility. The definition of metabolic flexibility is the capacity for skeletal muscle to acutely shift its reliance between lipids and glucose during fasting and or response to insulin, such as postprandial condition. This is a well-coordinated switch from one fuel source to the next, from fats to carbs and carbs to fat during a cycle of fast and fed state. While metabolic inflexibility, as described by Kelly et al., is a decrease or loss of metabolic flexibility, meaning the skeletal muscles is incapable of switching from one fuel to another, or the loss of skeletal muscles plasticity. Metabolic inflexibility is hypothesized to play a role in various disease processes such as insulin resistant state, obesity, as well as type 2 diabetes. So let us now review the concept of metabolic flexibility and inflexibility. In a metabolically flexible individual, usually seen in a normal weight individual during the fasting state, there is a preferential for fatty acid oxidation in the muscle and suppression or suppressed glucose oxidation. Also, in the fasting state, individual with metabolic inflexibility, often those who are overweight or obese, there is a diminished preference for fatty acid oxidation and a reduced suppression of glucose oxidation during fasting. In the postprandial state, metabolically flexible individuals exhibit a reduced fatty acid oxidation with a preference for glucose oxidation. Conversely, metabolically inflexible individuals show less reduction in fatty acid oxidation and diminished preference for glucose oxidation during the postprandial period. Okay, another way of illustrating it, you can see on top, insulin sensitive subjects increases its reliance to glucose oxidation and move to fat oxidation as they move towards the fasting state. At the lower panel, here in an insulin resistant subjects seen in obese individual and metabolically inflexible individual, no such modulation takes place compared to metabolically flexible individual. Now, how do we measure metabolic flexibility in an individual in the clinics? By comparing the volume of oxygen consumed to the volume of carbon dioxide produced. This volume will change depending on the energy source, predominantly substrate, with the individual on what the individual is using at that time. Now, normally both glucose and fatty acid substances are burned to aerobic metabolism. So, person is hooked up to a respirator and compare how much oxygen and carbon dioxide they inhale with how much they exhale. This process is called indirect calorimetry. First, we get an approximation of how much energy a person is consuming. Second, it produces what is called the respiratory exchange ratio, or RER, also called the respiratory quotient, RQ, an approximation of how much glucose versus how much fat your body is burning for energy. Well, just to tell you the difference between direct and indirect calorimetry, this is direct calorimetry, which involves the measurement of heat produced by the body during physical activity. A calorimeter is an insulator, airtight chamber. A subject's exercise in this chamber, and the heat generated is transferred to the air and wall of the chamber. This change in temperatures is measured, and metabolic rate can be calculated. Calorimeter is extremely expensive to construct and are slow in generating results, making it less commonly used now. Now, we check the respiratory quotient. Okay. The respiratory quotient, or RQ, is a measure of the ratio of carbon dioxide produced and oxygen consumed by the organism per unit time. The respiratory quotient, or RQ, is a ratio, therefore has no units. RQ, the equation is volume of carbon dioxide produced over the volume of oxygen consumed per unit time. The respiratory quotient, or RQ, is a valuable measurement, as it provides us with information regarding the nature of substrate being used by organism for respiration. In this reaction, looking at glucose, its chemical formula, it has 6 carbon dioxide molecules are produced in this reaction, and 6 oxygen molecules are consumed. So, RQ of this reaction is 6 carbon dioxide over 6 oxygen molecules is equivalent to 1. Therefore, the respiratory quotient, or RQ, of carbohydrates is 1. Now, when we look at fatty acids, for example, oleic acid, when used as a substrate for respiration, this is a simplified equation of the aerobic respiration of oleic acid. This is the chemical formula. The reaction uses 36 carbon dioxide molecules and are produced 51 oxygen molecules. And therefore, if we use our math, it will result into a value of 0.7. Therefore, the RQ of fatty acids is 0.7, below 1. And here's the following table shows the RQ values of the different classes of respiratory substrate when they are used for aerobic respiration. For glucose, like I said, 1. Fatty acids lower than 1, 0.7. Protein, 0.9. If any degree of anaerobic respiration occurs, RQ values significantly above the value of R are obtained. So these are aerobic respiration. Do some mental calisthenics. We now gonna use the RQ to determine a person which is whether metabolically flexible or inflexible. Okay. The overnight fat fast, normal metabolic flexibility individuals should oxidize more fat. So expect that the RQ should be lower than 1, lower than fat. Okay, so the black circle, the lower curve on letter A, should be more metabolically flexible. B, hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamp, which you give IV insulin as well as glucose to maintain a normal glucose level, and then you give a lot of glucose, so you have to metabolize normally glucose than fat. So since RQ of glucose is 1 and fat is lower, so the RQ for metabolically flexible individual in this environment should be higher. So the curve on the upper curve with a black circle is metabolically flexible. C, high carbohydrate diet is just simulating the postprandial state. So postprandial state should metabolize more or oxidize more glucose. So your curve should be, your RQ should be higher. So the upper curve with the black circle is more metabolically flexible. D, high fat diet that simulate fasting. So a lower RQ because you oxidize fat. Okay, so lower curve with the black circle is more metabolically flexible individual compared to the upper curve with the white circle. So let's summarize metabolic flexibility and inflexibility. So metabolic flexibility is basically the ability of our body to switch between carbs and fat and vice versa. So this is what happens. When we ingest carbohydrate, metabolic flexible individual helps them control blood glucose by burning glucose instead of fat. When they fast, metabolic flexible individual helps them burn the fat stored instead of becoming hungry for sugar or going catabolic. When they do exercise, metabolic flexible individual burns more stored fat and produce more energy at all levels of effort, especially on a prolonged exercise like the marathon runner, which burn fat to sustain the activity without depending much on glucose. While metabolically inflexible individuals are not able to switch between energy sources as we should. Metabolic inflexible individuals have difficulty using the available sugar for energy and be more likely to store it as fat. So, what is the implication of metabolic inflexibility? Fats are less oxidized during fasting and glucose is not used for energy following a meal. Therefore, higher and more rapid blood glucose spikes and drops in between meals. Hungry much sooner after eating, and especially one become hungry for sweets or sugars and carbs in order to keep up his energy. Okay, metabolic flexibility is primarily observed at the level of skeletal muscle, as evidenced by numerous studies focusing on these areas. The good question arises as to why skeletal muscles are significant contributors to metabolic inflexibility. And these are some of the different reasons. Number one, skeletal muscle play a crucial role in maintaining energy balance. It is one of the most metabolically active organs, featuring a vast surface area and significant storage capacity for both glycogen and lipids, which influences insulin sensitivity. Additionally, research indicates that skeletal muscle is responsible for approximately 80% of body insulin-stimulated glucose uptake. Therefore, it serves as the primary site for both glucose oxidation and fatty acid metabolism. A complementary study by Jerick et al. Demonstrated that after ingesting 100 grams of glucose, 70% of it enters the circulation postprandially, with 40% being absorbed by skeletal muscle. This experiment highlighted that the majority of glucose is taken up by muscle tissue. Thus, the role of skeletal muscle as a primary tissue responsible for peripheral insulin sensitivity and glucose homeostasis. Another study looking at the effect of insulin on peripheral as well as splanchnic glucose metabolism in type 2 diabetes by Professor DeFronzo. His study was compared with a normal individual. The study revealed that muscle tissue was responsible for 90% of glucose uptake of the infused glucose that was disposed or metabolized by peripheral tissue in the control subjects. These are the reason why skeletal muscle play a major role in glucose homeostasis. Okay, so the next thing to ask is what are the molecular mechanisms involved in the switching in the substrate utilization apart from hormonal control that we already discussed. For this, we need to do a little biochemistry, and the following are the list of the different molecular reasons, Randle and the reverse Randle cycle, as well as fatty acid suppressive effect on glucose uptake and oxidation. So the interplay between glucose and fatty acid on substrate oxidation in skeletal muscles in vivo has been studied for many years. The glucose fatty acid cycle was proposed by Randle and colleague, showing the ability of exogenous fatty acids to reduce glucose oxidation. But first, let me guide you through with my slides. The central section colored in pink represent reaction occurring in the cytoplasm. The lower section colored in green indicates reaction happening in the mitochondria, and the top section colored in blue shows substrate that can enter the cells and exit into the circulation. An increase in free fatty acid availability would lead to an increased free fatty acid oxidation, inhibiting pyruvate dehydrogenase and phosphofructokinase enzymes. Due to this inhibition, there is an accumulation of glucose 6-phosphate, which subsequently inhibit hexokinase activity. The increase in the intracellular glucose concentration then result in a negative feedback mechanism that reduces glucose uptake. Now the second came the observation that hyperglycemia can reduce fatty acid oxidation in skeletal muscle, designated as reverse Randle cycle. Here what's happened, an increase in glucose oxidation leads to accumulation of citrate, which diffuse out of the cytoplasm, then subsequently leads to formation of mononyl-CoA. As we all know, increase in mononyl-CoA is a committed step in a fatty acid synthesis. Physiologically, these two mechanisms occurs during the cycle of fast and fed state in healthy individuals, where oxidation of one substrate predominates over the other depending on the availability of the substrates and prevailing hormonal levels. And the third one is when healthy individual becomes unhealthy, such as individual becomes overweight and obese due to physical inactivity and or increase in calorie intake. A third mechanism was proposed. It suppresses the effect of fatty acids on glucose metabolism because of the accumulated lipid and lipid metabolites like diacylglycerol, ceramides, etc., that interfere with insulin signaling pathways. When nutrients are plentiful, such as glucose and fatty acids, fluxes into the intramitochondrial citrate through the TCA cycles and of the cytosolic citrate, which is able to stimulate ACC2, that's an enzyme, in which in turn increases the production of mononyl-CoA, and this mononyl-CoA inhibiting CPT1 will then block mitochondrial fatty acid CoA uptake and therefore limit beta oxidation. The mismatch between oxidation and uptake results in an increased level of long-chain fatty acid, of long-chain fatty acyl, diglycerol, triglyceride, intramuscular triglycerides, and ceramides, which interact with insulin signaling and reduce insulin-stimulated glucose uptake. And because of the increased free fatty acid uptake and reduced oxidation leads to lipid and lipid intermediates such as diacyl glycerol, ceramide, long-chain fatty acid, etc., that interfere again with the insulin signaling. There are several studies that specifically investigated skeletal muscle fatty acid uptake and oxidation in human subjects with insulin-resistant and or impaired glucose metabolism. Well, I have no intention to discuss each. Suffices to show that there are complex and sometimes contrasting and conflicting results, and this is most because of the difficulty in standardizing their method in measuring fatty acids uptake and oxidation. However, most studies do correlate with enhanced fatty acid uptake and blunted fatty acid oxidation. Well, this is an interesting result of a study on the reduced rates of fatty acid oxidation in obese and previously obese women by Tiefhold et al., published in American Journal of Physiology, Endocrinology, and Metabolism in 2004. There are two groups of studies. One, non-obese serve as a control, and extremely obese using in vitro study by muscle biopsy. Study muscle tissue directly in a controlled laboratory setting. The non-obese control shows very efficient fatty acid oxidation compared to extremely obese women. The second study looking at extreme obese and after weight reduction as much as greater than 45 kilo using an in vitro study with a tracer to track and measure the rate of fatty acid oxidation within the muscle cells. The results revealed even after weight loss or significant weight loss, fatty acid oxidation did not increase, suggesting that the skeletal muscles of these women were still less efficient at oxidizing fatty acid, indicating persistent metabolic adaptations or dysfunctions that weren't completely resolved by weight loss alone. So the question remains, is the defective fat oxidation the chicken or the egg of insulin resistant and obesity? Meaning, do pre-obese individuals possess muscle that is defective in metabolizing fat, or does this occur after the onset of insulin resistant or obesity? Well, the answer to this question remain unknown. However, the evidence do support depressed lipid oxidation as a causal factor. In the study by Moreno et al., it shows a high-fat diet results in incomplete fatty acid oxidation then lead to insulin resistant in muscle. Okay, so that one of the ultimate results of defect in metabolic flexibility is insulin resistant. Fasting metabolism impact postprandial metabolism and vice versa. A reduced basal state lipid oxidation capacity leads to impaired glucose metabolism during postprandial condition. The factor contributing to metabolic inflexibility are varied. There are genetic predisposition, physical inactivity, and of course, excess energy intake. Okay, there are no specific genes identified for metabolic inflexibility, but in obese individuals, there is often some form of impaired metabolic function. Here are chromosomal locations of genes associated with obesity. However, these are predisposing genes and environmental factors may play a significant role. In fact, the major culprit of the recent obesity epidemic appears to be the changing environment that promotes excessive calorie intake and discourages physical activity, conditions that are poorly compensated for under the prevailing characteristic of our genome. This slide depicts the interaction between genes and environmental factors that may lead to a new and different population. Indeed, our ancient genome has evolved under times of deprivation, when food was only periodically available and the risk of famine was ever present. In addition, large amounts of physical effort were required to obtain food. And to fight or flight, genes that predisposes to obesity may have provided survival advantage in times of famine. Adult or present-day industrialized countries may have a thrifty gene, so-called hunter-gatherer genome, but live in a sedentary, food-abundant society. This mismatch between our ancient biology and present-day living circumstances can lead to energy imbalance and thus metabolic inflexibility, insulin resistance, and eventually to obesity, as well as type 2 DM. As a consequence, modern human species are populated with individuals who are likely to be provided with the ability to sustain biological functions and efficiency and to store excess energy in adipose tissue with triglycerides in a non-adipose tissue as well. This mismatch again between our ancient genes, biology, and present-day living circumstances can lead to energy imbalance and eventually to metabolic inflexibility, insulin resistance, and obesity. An example of this gene environment interaction can be derived from a population apparently predisposed to obesity and type 2 DM, such as the Pima Indians. The Pima Indians' restrictive environment of the remote Mexican Sierra Madre Mountains have a much lower prevalence of obesity and type 2 DM than those living in the obesogenic environment of Arizona in the southwestern United States. Now let's go now to physical inactivity. The best study on physical inactivity and metabolic inflexibility is the evidence from the bed rest studies. Whole body and muscle metabolic alteration induced by 2 months of bed rest in women postprandially following an ingestion of a standard breakfast and lunch. The upper panel is the whole body and lower panel is the muscle alteration. Let's just concentrate on the muscle. There was a reduced fatty acid transfer and oxidative capacity, and this matched with the increase in intramuscular lipid content and intramuscular storage dietary fat. Interestingly, there was also a change in the muscle fiber types favoring fat storage. So, it do suggest that bed rest may cause metabolic inflexibility, leading to insulin resistance, impaired lipid trafficking, and hyperlipidemia, and a shift in a substrate use towards glucose, and a shift of muscle fibers and ectopic fat storage. So this slide shows the relationship of the physical activity and muscle fiber profile. As the physical activity reduces, individuals develop more type 2 fibers more than type 1 fibers, and as type 2 fibers predominate, it causes reduced insulin sensitivity, reduced oxidative capacity of fat, and reduce mitochondrial content, and decrease in intramuscular triglyceride turnover, resulting in increased intramuscular triglyceride deposition or storage. Now let's go now to the role of metabolic inflexibility in the advancement of metabolic disorder. The combination of reduced fasting lipid metabolism and impaired postprandial glucose tolerance that are seen in metabolic inflexibility leads to hyperlipidemia, hyperglycemia, and hyperinsulinemia. It's capable of exacerbating the onset of central obesity, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome resulting to atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease. Increase in free fatty acid leads to expanded adiposity, not only in adipocytes but also causing ectopic fat. As a result, there are good numbers of pro-inflammatory cytokines such as tumor necrosis factor alpha, which is an orchestrator of inflammation that not only causes vascular inflammation but decrease insulin action, causing insulin resistance. Hyperglycemia leads to increased oxidative stress and inflammation, which in turn decrease nitric oxide bioavailability and impaired endothelial function. While hyperinsulinemia activates MAC-dependent pathways and stimulate vascular smooth muscle cells and atherosclerotic lesions. So we go to the prevention and treatment of metabolic inflexibility, the effect of lifestyle on metabolic flexibility. Okay, number one is weight loss. Weight loss is very important. It shows here that both moderate weight loss as a result of dietary modification, that's more than 10% of loss of body weight, or large amount of weight loss by surgical intervention as high as 30% of body weight loss consistently improve insulin sensitivity and reduce the risk of cardiometabolic syndrome in both men and women. The total body weight loss, which includes reduction in visceral adiposity, results in improved insulin sensitivity. However, with weight loss in relation to metabolic flexibility, despite improved insulin sensitivity with weight loss, there is a lack of improvement in skeletal muscle fat oxidation after weight loss alone, observed during the fasting and during exercise. Altogether, there are clear indications that weight loss is able to partly reverse postprandial impairment in metabolic flexibility of a substrate oxidation. Whereas with respect to fasting condition, improved regulation of fat oxidation could not be confirmed in all studies. So what about exercise in the treatment and prevention of metabolic inflexibility? Exercise has been shown, both acute and chronic, that a single session of exercise can restore insulin sensitivity in a previously resistant skeletal muscles. Increasing regular physical activity or aerobic exercise training improve insulin sensitivity. Aerobic exercise directly increases energy expenditure and oxidative capacity. There are studies to show that chronic aerobic exercise training improve insulin sensitivity in type 2 diabetes without changing the intramuscular content of lipids. Again, chronic exercise improve capacity of skeletal muscles to utilize fatty acids for fuel. During exercise, it improves fasting fat oxidation and metabolic flexibility. So what about diet and exercise program? In the management of metabolic inflexibility, good postures and co-workers perform a combined training and weight loss study in obese subjects. This program did improve fat oxidation during fasting as well as the insulin-mediated switch from fat oxidation to carbohydrates oxidation. So it appears that the combination of continuous exercise and diet with significant weight loss may have impact on metabolic inflexibility than weight loss alone. Muscles. So in summary, metabolic flexibility is the ability of our bodies to switch back and forth between the two major energy substrates, glucose and fatty acid, which is called fuel switch. Okay? Metabolic flexibility allows us to control blood glucose after eating, burn fat while fasting, and otherwise respond appropriately to changes in energy supply and demand. Metabolic flexibility is typically measured via changes in the respiratory quotient or RQ, which approximate the ratio of fat and carbo burning during the time period measured. Metabolic inflexibility is impaired of the ability to increase or diminish fat oxidation. That is a bad switch. The cause of metabolic inflexibility is not known exactly, but it is believed that genetic and environment plays an important role. And impaired fat oxidation in skeletal muscle appears to be the key factor in the development of metabolic inflexibility. The concept of metabolic inflexibility has been linked with insulin-resistant type 2 DM and cardiometabolic syndrome. So what is the prevention and treatment? It seems that weight loss alone improves insulin sensitivity, but will need to be combined with exercise to improve fasting, fatty acid oxidation, and mitochondrial function. Therefore, exercise that not only burn calories, but it restores metabolic flexibility. So with that, I'll close my presentation. Thank you for listening.